Good evening, Dharam Salah. Good evening, Patricia Dominguez. Good evening, Mario Garcia Torres. I'm very pleased to welcome you to this conversation. My name is Daniela Zyman. I speak from Vienna, Austria. I'm the Artistic Director of TBA 21 and the co-curator of this online exhibition called Watery Witnesses that is presented on the DIF online website. So we're really gathered here, the three of us, to celebrate this little mini exhibition that circles, of course, around the question of water and watery existences, water justice, environmental justice. And hopefully in our ongoing conversations tonight, we'll unravel some of the questions pertinent to your artistic practices and the way you have been thinking and working with the imaginary of water, water realities, scarcity of water, and many questions surrounding, the hydrological circle and cycles that concern us all. Firstly, let me say a few things about this mini exhibition. I call it exhibition. We can call it mini online program, Watery Witness. All the works assembled are from TBA 21's collection archive. Some works have been commissioned, other works have been contributed by artists to the collection over the past years. More or less, all the works span about 15 years of TBA 21's history. In those 15 years, TBA 21 has embarked on a program called TBA 21 Academy that specifically investigates the oceans and many questions that intersect oceans and water, oceans, water justice, environmental justice, but also questions, of course, of human rights, questions of social justice, and the way different communities, coastal communities, ancestral communities, watery communities, if we want, are seeing water today and have been engaging with water, for decades, centuries, and more. TBA 21 Academy has created a large body of research and knowledge. It is housed in Venice at the Ocean Space in Venice. And so I'm also here to honor the work of TBA 21 Academy, but also the participation of TBA 21, The Stage, which is another kind of platform TBA has been developing over the last year and a half, really, starting with the pandemic. And I think, Patricia, your work was really developed with Soledad Gutierrez for the stage and can be visited and revisited on stage, which I just recently did again. So there's a huge and wonderful archive, both of artworks, conversations, discussions on TBA 21, The Stage, which deals particularly with your work. We've talked a little bit about water and water justice as one complex, the sanitary crisis, different environmental issues intersecting with question of water. But of course, water also has, let's say, a very poetic quality, has the possibility of, thinking with fluidity, thinking with immersion, with suspension, with ways of perhaps change our ways of knowing the world, our epistemologies, our ways of engaging with the world. The world sort of seen from the watery realm, if we want, whether it is the oceans, the rivers, the lakes, the water sources, underground and overground, perhaps offer different perspective for artists, for researchers, for thinkers, for poets, for writers, but also literally for everyone, for water lovers, let's say, perhaps to see and think of things a little bit differently, reversed, upside down, from below, with perhaps less transparency than how we sort of see our world, but also in some ways, and I like to think about and propose to you two ways of sort of thinking about water. One in its longevity. You know, water is really very, very old, and life forms in water had so much more time to develop and develop a form of intelligence, right? That we sort of terrestrial beings were much later to sort of catch up on. So water creates an incredible diversity, or life in water has also created an incredible diversity because of these sort of long kind of development times. But also another kind of inspiration for me to depart from is perhaps to see water as something that connects us, as a connecting tissue, not just in this metaphor and existing sort of hydrological cycle, but water as a medium, you know, being submerged in water is actually a possibility of seeing connection in different ways than the sort of atmospheric, right? You see the particles in water, you see the life forms in water, you know that everything that has been water returns to a watery existence. Yeah? So these are three questions, I would say, that I'd like to open up. One is water justice as, let's say, a larger complex, the poetics of water in their fluidity and everything else, but also, let's say, water as ancient wisdom and as form of conceiving of diversity as a little bit different ways than perhaps we do when we sort of depart from a terrestrial point of view. I would like to introduce our guests. So firstly, Patricia Dominguez has contributed a beautiful piece called La Balada de la Sirena secas, the Ballad of the Dry Mermaids from 2020. As I said, it is on view on the stage. And Patricia has an incredible wealth of contributions, of artworks, and she's really been working for a very long time on issues and environmental issues, healing practices, questions of well-being, bodily well-being, but also our role in the sort of planetary existence. I understand you're currently working for CERN, which is really very exciting, and I hope to hear a little bit more about that element in your sort of research. Secondly, I'm very happy to welcome Mario Garcia Torres, speaking to us today from Los Angeles, but mainly working out of Mexico City, if I may say. Mario and I, we have been working together for many years, but mainly for an exhibition at TBA 21 Vienna Augarten. And Mario has created a beautiful work at the time, and that work is included in the selection of Watery Witnesses, and it's called The Way They Looked at Each Other, and non-dated, a non-dated work of art. And again, Mario contributed works in Documenta and Manifesta at TBA 21. He's present in many collections. Again, a very abundant production of artistic work, and sometimes switching from filmic work, object-based work, painting, and performance. And I think that is also quite interesting, perhaps today in our discussion. But first, I would like to start asking Patricia to perhaps describe the baladas, the work that we are going to explore today, a little bit the origin, the research, what led you there, the networks. Give us an introduction, please, to how this work came about.
Sure. So I guess I will start with the environmental justice. So to give a little bit of context, in Chile, during the dictatorship, all the water was privatized, slowly privatized in the 80s. So actually now more than 100% of our waters are privatized. So yes, if you see, for example, the water coming from the mountains is first kept by the minings and then by the huge agriculture. So they start intervening the coast of the rivers until they're totally dry. So for example, from the center part of Chile up, all the rivers are, almost all are completely dry. And also, apart from that, like Chile is this neoliberal laboratory of privatization and extraction. So the huge damage to the environment and multi-species living, but also as a human level is huge. At the moment I did the video, we were going through the pandemic. So there are a lot of communities in this area. This is called a sacrifice area, which are basically these kind of like rural poor areas that are dedicated to extraction. So we have a lot of problem with pollution, but also lack of water. So the community where we did the video along the view, La Viudas del Agua, which is one of the main activist groups, female activist group in Chile that are dealing with defending the water. Actually, a lot of those communities didn't even have water to wash their hands. They have been given water through municipality because the government has to give them some water to live, but it's not like running water, and it's even much less what the OMS suggests as a daily consumption. So the video was in the middle of the lockdown, and we kind of infiltrated all this avocado or paltas plantation. So I wanted to collaborate with this woman because this also, like, all this environment is very patriarchal, men-based. So I was really interested in collaborating with this more like feminine approach, because I think those women really understand what these waters mean in their fluids, in their kids, in the environment, So we try to, because they are activists, but in the video we try to access the water problem also through a broader lens, which also means more the cultural aspect. Because, for example, we went to the petroglyphs that now they have been kind of updating all this kind of graffiti in the streets, yearning for free access of water. I also collaborated with a cantora lo divino, which is a singer to the divine, like a colonial way of singing, but now his name is Juan Lopez. He has translated and re-updated this singing, but to the drought. We are actually going through the biggest drought for the last 10 years. So actually, like, we have been slowly let the plants basically die because there's no water. Like, the ecosystem had just completely be cut through these big corporations. So at some moment we were like trying to choreograph all that in the video, and actually doing some kind of little rituals in the dry rivers to call to the memory of the water back, at the same time of giving some information about the current political context. But we try to mix this kind of like more dream state language and activist together. Yeah, so that's a little bit of the context.
Perhaps just one more question.
And just to finish one thing that I've been working with the tears. Before, I was working with the possibilities of crying, like I did a piece in Bolivia with the fires that I happened to be there. And then the protests in Chile, we have been having this protest for dignity, and people have been injured by police in the eyes. So I was using this image of the running tears to talk about what is happening in this part of the planet. And then I related to these communities because they were saying that they're so dry, they don't even have water to cry, So through the tears, I kind of connected the lack of water in the other way. Yes.
I wanted to ask you to perhaps also give us a short historic summary of the privatization of water. And I don't mean historic by dates, but, perhaps for us to understand, and again, speaking to the Himalayan, how can it happen that water gets private? How can it happen that communities don't get access to water? And what can we do also to prevent that to happen? What are the perhaps the signals that we should be taking seriously, in your view, to realize what is happening on the waterfront?
Yeah, good question. I am not an expert at all, but I will try to explain what I do know. So yeah, in the dictatorship, the water was in the new constitution. They said that the water was public, but the water was also private. So basically, you can ask for water rights and then you can sell them. So there's a market where water is sold. So basically, all the big corporations started buying all these derechos. Sorry, how do you say? This access to water, and they separated the land through the water. So all these, for example, rural people they were farmers, they had the land, but they don't have the access, the right to use the water to plant. And there's a lot of rich people that have the water, but they don't have the land, you know? So basically, even if you have water running in front of your land, you cannot use it unless you had the rights. So slowly, all these big corporations from the 80s has been buying all these rights and then just having the monopoly for the water. So basically, there's no real access to basic consumption of water, or to even protect the ecosystems. And then the water now is so hard to get because it's dry that the levels of speculation and prices that you can pay for just having access to 1 liter per second is almost impossible to pay. So that's one of the main reasons that we have been having all these protests and political uprisings since the last 2 or 3 years in Chile. And now we're going in the process to rewriting the new constitution, and the access to water is one of the main concerns. Like, it's kind of like in the middle of the discussion. So hopefully that will change a little bit. But yeah, a lot of people ended selling their rights because you can ask them for free. The thing is that if you ask it for free, it's forever yours and you can sell it. So it ended being a huge business for a lot of people.
Thank you, Patricia. So perhaps by way of connecting to Mario's work, this makes me think, everything you said, Patricia, makes me think of the reality and the realization that a lot of the, let's say, conflicts we have been seeing on the European continent, or, well, not just on the European continent, but, you know, throughout the Middle East primarily over the last decade, actually does have a lot to do with water, including, you know, the war in Syria, which, you know, literally started with the fact that a population that is sort of very much based on agriculture, you know, doesn't have the possibility any longer to survive on agriculture because of the lack of water, that therefore migrating to the cities, then in the cities basically not being able to sustain their livelihood. And so it sort of spirals into kind of a political crisis. And the link here is perhaps a weak one, but the way they looked at each other basically takes place mainly in Baghdad, and with the wonderful city, with the wonderful river of the Tigris, but also other rivers, sort of other rivers kind of mainly feature in the film. And Mario, I'd love you to sort of introduce the work that you have done and the film, and perhaps speak a little bit about the role of the rivers as witnesses in kind of a testimonial case that also brings about many other questions.
Hi, both of you. Thanks for allowing me to be here. First of all, I have to say I'm in shock of what Patricia is saying. It's quite scary to think of that. And I've been slightly related to rivers in Mexico City, where I live. One of the issues that I talked to is the fact that they paved some rivers. I mean, this is a story that comes from even from ancient times, from Aztecs, and from the Aztecs already had a problem with, because the rivers were contaminated back then, so 500 years ago. So they already had started to deal with how to clean the city, and so it's a story that, well, in actual terms, in modern times, is when they actually put them through tubes and created these huge highways on top of it. But now it makes me think what you're talking about. Makes me a bit scary, because one of the things that are beyond water, one of the things that I've been fighting or trying to fight in Mexico City is against advertising, because now these rivers, that what used to be rivers, now they're full of big billboards on top of them. And I realized that the most complicated problem to take them down is the fact that when you give somebody a permission to put up an advertising, that becomes private property. And when it becomes private property, legally, it's very complicated to, the state cannot take out your property, because that's constitutionally complicated. It's a dictator, basically, somebody who can take off your property. So it's very, very complicated. So when you talk about property in water, it makes me really, really scary, because it's really legally very, very complicated to do that. So, but anyway, I'm sorry to deviate.
No, that's very interesting. It's like a river of information, and I guess they use it as a way of acquiring the land, right? At the end, if they kind of own the land.
Absolutely. Absolutely, and then they own the sky and the landscape, everything. It's so you keep growing with that. But anyway, the piece, the way they look at each other is a piece that takes as a starting point the Tigris, the river, and it's a piece that goes beyond the immediate relationships of water and rivers. It takes the Tigris as a starting, as a main point. Well, it's a video. It's a probably 1 hour essay that talks mainly about the relationship or a specific incident that happened in 2003 in Iraq. When the NATO troops invaded Afghanistan, Iraq, Baghdad. That day, the American troops shooted a bombshell towards a hotel where journalists were staying. And as you know, in a war situation, there's certain organizations that happen through that, and one of them is that they define where journalists are staying, or where they're covering the war from. And nevertheless, after a number of hours, this incident happened, and the river turns out to be a very specific character in this story, in this incident, because he was the thing that divided the journalists from the tank, the military tank that shot this thing. So that's how this became this sort of more complicated legal situation. Also, in many ways, the piece, in fact, argues for a certain cultural, argues to look at those legal issues through cultural and poetic languages. Basically, it argues for argues about the fact that cultural languages have a say, not only in terms of when we try to understand the world, and argues for trying to look at things in a different way, even in the legal language or in the legal space. And mostly this sort of the piece tries to rescue a very specific fact that happened, that this complicated situation with so in this incident, a Spanish journalist died, and a number of journalists were injured. And I was really intrigued about this issue, not only because of this sad incident, but also because of a Spanish judge had come years later, had tried to bring the issue into Spain and tried to make an international court about it, in fact. And in one of the things that he did was a very specific cultural gesture, almost artistic gesture, which was that he took a crowd of journalists with him and went and flew to Baghdad and went to try and see what that meant to look at one of the, because of the arguments were how to look through the river, with the river dividing both of them. But because the whole court case was related to the fact that if the tank could know that there was people in there, and if they could know that they were journalists and not how do you call this,
soldiers or terrorists,
insurgents, right? And if the other ones could see each other, so the judge went there and traveled there and stayed where the tank was, and tried to take a picture with his little camera like this towards the hotel where they had shot the bomb. And I thought this was really interesting, because beyond the fact that it was really silly to do that, he was bringing precisely what I believe is what we do, to try to bring a more symbolic act to try to explain something in legal terms, and he so this became, the image that he took became an interesting image, and the fact that the journalists were taking pictures of him doing this fact became quite interesting. So anyway, this is a whole story. But so the river became the space that divided these two characters in the film, and also what put them together, and that's how I developed that. This is also quite interesting to me to be talking here, because in fact this piece has a larger context, which is it's I mean, I don't know, like I it's a lot of things happen after invitations from Thyssen-Bornemisza Misa 21. This piece, in fact, was produced, as Daniela said, for an exhibition at an art garden in the space they had there in Vienna. But in fact, the origin of this is another piece that also is way more, that developed more into the rivers part and less into the legal part. And that's a piece that ended up being called 5 Feet High and Rising. And it's 5 Feet High and Rising is also a song by Johnny Cash, which talks about the floods in the Mississippi River in the middle of America. And this was a piece that was developed the beginning of it was developed quite fast. One time that Daniela invited me to be part of a gathering in an island called Lopud in the Mediterranean somewhere.
In Croatia,
and she told me like a couple of weeks before, she's like, yeah, but you have to talk. You're invited to come to this gathering, but you have to talk. So I somehow, I don't know, I was thinking about water and rivers in specific, but seen from a different perspective, which was some kind of cultural perspective, and how rivers and the idea of rivers, the idea of fluidity, the idea of a vital element in them, but how that has been related to popular culture. And so this 5 Feet High and Rising is in fact some kind of lecture. I call it a DJ lecture, because it's a lecture that is spiced up by bringing popular songs which talk about rivers. And this is, in fact, it started because, I started to think about it because when Daniela started to say, well, you know, you need to say something about water. I was like, well, I'm from the desert. What can I say about water? But what you were saying just before, it really resonated in me because so I realized that, I mean, I became more conscious about the fact that I am from a small town in the desert where I never saw a river. The river was always there. The space for the river was always there, but there was never water in it. You know, I could go back to, you know, the 1940s where my small town became a steel company town, and they suck all the water in order to produce steel, and that made the city grow a little bit. But by the time I was born, this river was gone. And so the piece really starts by telling my personal story to rivers, and to always be sort of looking into or looking to be next to a river, and always failing from my little story from Monclova to Monterrey in the north of Mexico, where there was the same situation, and then to Mexico City with the same situation, and then to Los Angeles, which is kind of the same situation. So it's there's a story of longing for being next to water, and that's how the piece started. But what I was going to say is that, Daniela, what you were saying about the third issue, it's also resonated a lot, because when you go back to the desert, I mean, this idea of water, this sort of shapes, historical, geological shapes of water, they're still present, right? So there's this sort of strange relationship when you sit in the middle of a dry valley, but you see the mountains that were there, that were covered with water at some point in geological times. And it's good. So many things that you think in the in the desert subjectivity actually come from the shapes of water. They come from things that have been shaped by water, have been it's very strange. We think of water as a very specific shape, but the history of what has left is become the desert. So I think this is also interesting when we talk about now that that's a whole world, we are in this crisis and in this situation, looking at it again, is how that path has left us with a very specific subjectivity. You know? But anyway, I don't even know what I'm talking about. I'm just going over. But I don't know.
Well, thank you.
I don't know.
I'll come back to that, Mario. Do you have you've raised many issues, but perhaps to bring Patricia back to the conversation, perhaps two things. One is if you want to sort of answer to anything that Mario has perhaps mentioned, but also second part of the question would be, so how do you see your artistic intervention practice in that context of, let's say, the Chilean or Latin American water crisis and privatization? You know, where exactly do you find your entry point, and what are the methods, the strategy that you find most useful or more adequate to your sort of sensibility to talk about it, to speak to it, and to unravel it?
No, first of all, I agree with Mario that I think as artists, we work symbolically. I think it's the way we really understand and connect, you know, like science can explain things, but through memories, like we live in so many different layers of perceiving and being, that I think like through memories, you know, like we are like storytellings. So I do think a lot about, like, I don't know, I think it's nice to reach the water through, you know, like through the site in a way. I think a lot how we all are made of recycled water, right? Like the same water has kind of like shaped everything that is made, and you know, it's like, what are you gonna do with the water that goes through your body, or what kind of memories are gonna put, or how can you connect with the yeah, I guess the symbolical part and the cultural part, for me is very complex. And in that way, to answer the second question, is like, I am an educator, I am an activist, but more than anything, I kind of defend my artistic freedom in the way that I use a lot of fiction, because for me, imagination and creativity, for me, is the way that we can at least imagine, or at least, give a little bit of space to these kind of horrific realities. And different things happen, because I feel like through activism, I think it's very important, but we always go through the same ways. And I think it's important to actually move reality. But as an artist, I really use a lot of imagination, and I mix. It's like, this kind of like, it's like a dream language for me. You can put everything together and mix in other ways and think about things in another part, and always through some kind of personal story. It's like I need like one story to enter the bigger themes. If not, it's like too much. So yeah, usually like all my pieces start from one kind of relationship between humans and water, humans and a mountain, or with animals, or even in between humans. Now with CERN, it's kind of like amplifying to the invisible word, like words of the particles, but it's like this kind of in relationship. And it's like, what kind of relationships are we establishing in this digital era, extractivist era, like, and usually are, I think, relationships that emerge from affection, labor, obligation, play. So yeah, I do stand in that kind of fictional part, which I try to defend. Sometimes it's very difficult, because sometimes people ask, like, what is your piece doing? It doesn't do anything. It just raise question on even just of, for me, just proposing like a new way of thinking, or just giving the how do you say, like the space to think about this thing that nobody care, or just are seen as profit, just to see them in a different way. For me, sometimes it's enough, but it's very difficult to put a value of it, or put a like a result as activists. So I think that, as Mario was saying with the desert, I think all of these things work in a very different time layer. You have the fossils, you have the art that goes lower, you have the activism, which is urgent and very necessary too. So it's a time of temporalities, right, in their possible or not possible effectiveness.
You've been mentioning dreams, the magical, the fictional. Maybe you haven't said the surreal, but also that kind of comes across a little bit. What does these sort of non-reality realities mean to you, and how do you sort of engage with them, and how do you come to the fore? How do they come to the fore in your works?
I don't really have an answer, but I try to separate like fiction from surreal, or magic, or fantasy, in a way that for me fiction is just like a new way of thinking about the reality. And I think that dreams also sometimes can help us doing this kind of no, it's like putting everything into a stomach, and the stomach kind of combine it in a different way, and you have some kind of result. So yeah, for me it's a way of kind of free my lineal mind, to re-choreograph reality. So that's why I think, at least in my opinion, for me, it's more interesting to work through fiction, or to dreams, than surrealism. Maybe sometimes they mix, but I guess it's like a new way of accessing reality that, it's like a game. I don't want to say game, but it's like I think fiction, it needs to be needed. It's like I need fiction to talk about this horrible stuff. If not, I think it's just too much sometimes. But also like dreams, I think, is part of our our being. It's like water. We all understand that. And also like in the system we are, we all know it's like utilitarian, linear, everything has to make sense. So yes, occupying this way of like non-linear way of accessing the information is, for me, it's also like a political act, just to get lost in memories and possible meanings. It's a political act. Yeah.
Thank you. I mean, I think surrealism has such a, let's say, narrow connotation, and I didn't mean that only. Maybe we can sort of talk about that as well. But I think the fact that there is a different reality than the one we describe as being linear, rational, and so on and so forth, and
Yeah.
how to access that, how to activate that. And certainly with these water imaginaries, I think there's a lot of dreaming, fluidity, transparency between the realms of the real and the non-real, that sort of come into play, which is really very interesting.
Mm.
in my
I just
mind.
want to add to Mario that I also grew up in the desert, so this kind of relationship to the fossils, or I've been working with an indigenous base that was buried there. It's a very complicated story, but it's an indigenous base that cry. So it's like this allusion to water through dryness, or this kind of little container that used to hold water in such a scarce place. So I don't know, so many times it's about the memory of the idea, or even like calling it in your mind, right? The physicality of water. Mm.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, yeah. We talked before, Daniela, about fiction, no, about or the new. I am, I think, invested in fiction sometimes, but it's becoming different, no, from the last 5, 7, 8 years. I don't know that fiction has become part of politics, and this becomes a very sort of blurry space, right? It's where who owns fiction. It used to be that fiction was a literary thing and it had to do with art and culture and whatever, but suddenly fiction became part of politics, became part of the real world. I could mention a number of big powerful presidents all over the world. In my case, it's been really crazy that Mexican president, every time that they come to him, they say, "Oh, he always says, I have a different version." It's like, so suddenly I am troubled. I mean, I'm troubled. It's not a resolved issue for me. I think that it was something that belonged to us, that nobody could take it from us, and suddenly it's part of somebody else. And now I feel very strangely, my relationship to fiction is very strange, because I don't know if I should participate in it or not. Suddenly, at some point, I was like, "Oh, that's it. Fiction is gone, and that now belongs to politics, so I cannot touch it." And then some other days, I wake up and I said, "No, I have to recuperate this. Fiction belongs to a different world," like you were saying, Patricia. Like it allows you to think in a different way. And well, there's many other good things. But anyway, I was.
I think it
yeah,
is a
but I
very
think it's an important issue to talk about here.
No, I think it's a very important point, because it's not just fiction, it's imagination, it's fantasy and fiction, 3 terms again quite closely related, that are all occupied by politics and economics and entrepreneurial thinking, right? I mean, imagine, right? The old Apple, I mean, Imagine has been the Beatles for a very long time, and then, in the 2000s became the sort of Apple advertisement, right? And every entrepreneur is creativity obviously, and so on and so forth. I mean, we know all of that, yeah? But actually it means exactly as you say, there is an incredible encroachment and normalization happening there, which completely takes out the possibility of intervention, of contestation, of reimagination, from one realm of culture and art and artistic production into this, let's say, normalized world of politics, which is completely denormalized, in fact. And that is interesting. I don't know, Patricia, if you have something to add to that, but
No, totally. That's such a great point. It just made me think that now I was at CERN, and yeah, I was trying to think about this huge machine as a contemporary myth, the bigger machine that is like anti-military, like kind of remaking these origin tales in the modern society. But at the same time, being there is like there's this completely opposite to fiction or to myth. It's all about facts. It's all about like any like one news that they get out. It's like being proven and investigated for so long. So we talk a lot about this kind of fake news in relationship to science, and kind of makes me at that time kind of like really admire how much do they care about truth in a quantified way, you know? In relationship to all these like politicians, mythological thinking. Yeah, I think it's very
CERN,
situation.
CERN is the one that is the thing
Large
that has
Hadron Collider.
The particle
collider in next to
the particle. Okay. Yeah. Okay, sure. Yeah.
Particle accelerator.
But we did engage a lot in this discussion about fake news, you know, and like reality and how we measure everything now through data and yeah, made me also think about all this, you know, like, yeah, I think it's a complicated thing, but we also talk about a lot about like AI and the limits, you know, between what a human can do and then how being creative as human makes you really like, it's like the limit that we are dealing with, you know, in all this AI or quantum computing on all that. But yeah, as Mario says, it's like a realm that we all navigate these days. So it's very complicated.
Let's return to water one more time before we completely off on the on the particle accelerator. Perhaps one more specific question to you, Patricia, which would be, I think this question of owning and the privatization of water obviously relates to the question of owning biodiversity, right? So owning water means owning a certain, let's say, abundance of life forms and possibility of life forms, and in a way also relate to the owning of biodiversity in terms of, you know, seeds and different, let's say, patent over animals that are reproduced and so on and so forth. And obviously, at the end of the day, it means that diversity, which used to be our commons, right? It used to be that which belongs to the planet and therefore doesn't belong to anyone, you know, more and more is certainly in the hands of corporate entities, and therefore shrinks massively and really by the hundreds, right? Year by year, because we only eat 2 types of chicken and we only eat, you know, 5 types of pigs, and we grow 2 types of wheat and so on and so forth. And I think what I'm interested in hearing from you, other than perhaps comments about that, is also in a way how the new constitutional efforts that we see coming out of Chile are perhaps trying to intervene in this constellation and create forms of contestation that come from sort of different traditions. And again, perhaps speaking to the Himalayas, speaking to India, you know, how your involvement in the struggle, so to say, you know, has brought certain ways or certain forms of knowledge that can be also shared and be a useful basis for our discussion.
Sure. No, I think that it's very surprising that the new constitution, like the, you know, like the possibility of doing the new constitution was made through just being in the streets, basically, like protesting. And then we, as the people, were able to vote to elect the people that we actually proposed the new constitution. And just through being in the streets, we were able to manage to have like a equal, like a gender equal constitution, which that's huge in Chile because, you know, as South American country, and I'm sure India is similar, is made like male based, everything, you know, almost everything. So it's like gender parity. Then they have like seats for indigenous people from, you know, different parts of the country. We have LGBT people, and the director of the convention is an indigenous woman that is also an academicist and is a woman, you know. So that has really add to this diversity loss that we are seeing in this kind of like system, right? Because she also speaks Mapudungun, and then all the constitution assemblies are started through saying, you know, like the opening in 2 languages, and also like kind of how do you say, like calling to the Madre Tierra, just acknowledging, you know, like the earth. So that and at a symbolical level, is huge. It had never happened something like this, and I think it's almost like the contrast. It's like so neoliberal that the other contrast is that. But this has been just won in the streets. That's been the only way. But it's very interesting. But if they can do their work, and for example, from Modatima, I forgot to tell, but Modatima is the activist group that we collaborated for the video. They ended having 7 people in this convention, so they're all fighting for the access of water, for also like ecological safeguard for the constitution. So if they ended being able to do what they do, because they're having a huge attack, of course, from the right, all these lobby corporations, huge. But if they ended doing this, I think it would be like a step in toward like diversity in a way. Because, for example, all these monocultures that we have here with the agriculture due to the water, all the hills that used to be places for, like free animals, free birds, or even for pastoreo, like for animals eating in the winter, they're not just monocultures. All of these aguacate are planted in rows of also. It's like you have the monoculture plantation, but also the lack of all other diversity, and not only in species, because, for example, as you were saying before, like all the memories of the people that live there or here, they have been shrunk because there's no river. A lot of celebrations will happen in the river. A lot of plants used to grow there that they're not there. There's only pictures. So all the experiences started getting very specific, and also all their kids have left to the city because they don't have water to keep their lands. So I feel experience-wise and also ecological-wise, everything gets very limited in a way. But we do have the hopes from the Constitution. At least we have that hope, If that happens, that will really change a lot.
Perhaps, Patricia, just very briefly, could you describe the sort of main ideas behind the new constitution?
Okay. Well, the main idea is to replace the constitution that was written during dictatorship, and that basically privatized everything: health, pensions, education, water, forest. So we are trying to at least provide general basic access to these basic things, because now if you don't have money, you cannot pay. There's no way you can access to like health, or education, or even a pension. People have to keep working until they die because there's no way of subsisting in this system, which everything is privatized. So it's all about money. There's no like public commons in a way. So those are the basic 5 lines, I would say, for the new constitution.
But also, as I understand, it sort of comes back a bit to this idea of natural rights, right? That basically non-human entities other than corporations, who always have been non-human entities, have certain forms of right within a constitutional setting.
Yes, there are some efforts to do like a ecological constitution, or even, Elisa Loncon, the president, she's like saying hi to Madre Tierra, but I think for now the discussion, the ecological discussion of the multi-species agency is too far behind in the sense that there's so many basic things for not well-being, but for dignity, as the other things I say, that I think it's in some parts of the constitution are trying to put it on the discussion, but it's like a very few parts still. But the people from Modatima are the ones kind of pushing for this kind of like ecological constitution, but it's not like the main. Well, I guess the water access is the main part, but it's more like from the human access first. But at least having listening this word Madre Tierra, which is like Mother Earth, which of course might sound like hippie or whatever, but it's huge, in a country where everything is like a thing to get profit, symbolically is a huge act. So that's starting to be part of the news or the newspaper, and it's almost fiction, but the good fiction.
Well, Mario, I would like to perhaps finish our conversation again with a double question to you. You can choose which one to answer and how to answer them. I mean, one is just sort of in line with what we heard from Patricia just now, basically about all the movements in Chile. I'm wondering what is happening in Mexico, also given that Mexico City, as you have indicated before, is literally drying out. I mean, I think we all read the news that the water reservoir is being drained, that, you know, the lake on which the city used to sit kind of disappears, and that it is one of the mega cities that will most likely hit a huge water crisis anytime soon. Do you see any kind of popular movements and activism along the line of the things that, well, perhaps not along the line because that we would know, but you know, how do you describe, let's say, the activist and political situation and awareness building around that in Mexico would be one part of my question. And if you do, you know, in what ways? Of course, Mexico being more northern and, you know, part of North America more than South America, there is another kind of, let's say, perhaps mentality that seeps through the borders. But I'd be interested in hearing you talk perhaps what you see in Mexico in regards to water and water precarity would be one part of the question. And the other one would be perhaps to follow up on what you said earlier about, you know, the culture war. And in a sense that culture has become more recently, and I think all over the world, a place of incredible contestation where mainly the political right is recapturing the narratives around culture and trying to sort of re-implement a reading of history, of religion, of tradition, of belonging, of identity that runs very much contrary to perhaps the efforts built up over the last 50 years, you know, to sort of perhaps create a juster society, or sort of a historical reading that is perhaps more pluralistic in certain ways, more multicultural. I mean, these are all contested terms, but I think what we see now in the realm of culture is a huge pushback in an area that for a very, very long time was perhaps dominated more by the intellectual left, let's say, rather than by the right. And we are seeing a lot of shifts happening there. So two big questions, you know, I don't know which one would you like to pick up on?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, yeah, interesting. Can't talk much about India, but I feel very, also many issues that Patricia has brought speak to me. I think that Mexico and we have a number of things related between Mexico and Chile, and two main things I would say. One is that we were both promises of neoliberalism. Both countries in the 1990s started to be looked at from the rest of the world as thinking, oh, they're going to have money. You know, finally, two countries from Latin America are going to have money, and so through neoliberalism really started to get attention to both of those, and I think so it's quite interesting that I think that number of things that Patricia has said also have echoes in what happened in Mexico in political terms. And the other thing I was going to say is that if I'm not mistaken, and I'm pretty sure about it, that we're both the biggest avocado producers in the world. And they call it in Mexico, I don't know, in Chile, but they call it the green gold.
Oro verde.
El oro verde. Because now everybody likes to have avocado toast in the world. and this is insane that they drove the prices of avocado absolutely insane. It's now in Mexico, there's a big war between avocado producers and drug dealers. Can you imagine? So the drug dealers are thinking, oh, the avocado guys are making money, so let's get them. So it's a whole, but back to water staff, they are also one of the main issues is that avocados also a very specific region in Mexico, the state of Michoacan and Jalisco. They're taking up all the water, absolutely, and they're not only taking the water, but also cutting huge parts of forest in order to grow avocado there. So anyway, that's a very, very large thinking, but a number of things. I mean, we're far from doing a constitution, which we should start thinking about it. But there is, I think that in Mexico right now, the discussion is that our new government is really pushing for fossil fuels. And that really has started. I mean, so the discussion, more than being immediately about the water, which is clear that is there, and the more warming up of the planet is making more dramatic, either both floods and drowness. I think that the discussion in Mexico right now is more about trying to convince the government to change that. I think we had moved slightly through the last 10 years, slightly more towards going into a different direction, also through neoliberalism anyway, but we have opened our laws to investments in other types of energy. But this government has totally, or is making a big fight to cut all that and go back to fossil fuels. So that's in ecological terms, that seems to be more present than the water issues, although the problems are there. But then everything that Patricia said is there, right? Like the native rights and how those native rights have become part of the cultural discussion out there. What is represented, what is not. There was a recent issue with feminism, abortion. All those issues are very much present in those cultural wars, let's say. There was a very, very recent big cultural discussion in relation to the fact that they took down a Christophilus Colon monument, and they wanted to create a monument for the native woman, and that just created the question of how to represent that and who's going to represent that and how so all those things are it seems that it's kind of strange that exactly the same issues being fought in Chile. It seems that they've won a number of wars that we haven't, to the abortion and things like that we're slowly getting there. But so they in fact have been an important the fights they've been doing in Chile. They've been an important pusher in Mexico, I think.
Yeah, but I must say that the level of violence that you deal in Mexico is like nothing compared. Here is nothing compared to Mexico. You know, like the level of violence that I see in Mexico is completely like here we have a lot of repression, but I guess in that sense it's much difficult, right, to make some changes with all the drug cartels and all that.
Yeah, well, they definitely drive a number of efforts and a number of money and a number of, I don't know. I mean, we could talk forever about what those policies are and what the different strategies that they've been implementing in the last 3-4 governments. and all of them failed dramatically, and
I think,
it
Mario,
just keeps growing.
I think your suggestion that the drug dealers are now going to become avocado planters, that is a really innovative idea of how to.
Well,
I never thought that an ecological agent, would be a drug dealer becoming an avocado cultivator. But that is a really interesting idea. I think we should cherish that for our moment and just sort of think that through. Because in a way, if an avocado is worth more than cocaine and heroin, that is an interesting thought on a sort of planet of scarcity.
No, that's sorry. Just I think it's important because as in Mexico here, local people cannot eat avocado because it's so expensive, But then it gets exported, for example, to Europe as this organic avocado, and everyone kind of eat it because it's organic. But I think it's super important to really trace the thing until its origin, because it can be organic, but it can be depleting the whole valley where it's grown. So I think we really need this kind of information to go out in the whole palette, I guess.
Well, rest assured, Patricia, there's a huge pushback against avocados. So people only eat their avocados now secretly.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
Oh yeah. Avocado is like smoking, right? It's like you cannot. Okay, I'm joking a little bit, but yes, there's a sort of a huge effort to raise consciousness. Exactly. But of course, these questions are always super complicated, as Mario said, and they're literally sort of entangled in so many other questions. No, compare an avocado to beef. No, I mean, to what do you compare it to? What does it mean? And so on and so forth. But let's cut that out. I think we've basically managed beautifully an hour, and I think unless we have something else urgently to say, I would just close the discussion, but I don't want to close it before asking you if there's anything that you have on your mind that you didn't say, I didn't ask, which we can obviously just add before we go.
I think we can keep talking forever. I will just, this is another conversation, but I will just ask Ritu, who is here, to talk about the farmer crisis in India. But I think that's for another talk, but just to establish this kind of relationship. But yeah, that's all.
Yeah, I mean,
I think Ritu fell asleep over our conversation.
I'm very much here. I've been, really, I'm going to come back because they can edit me out. Hold on. I think they've disabled me. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
You should be good.
No, that was so interesting because.
Thank you, Patricia. Thank you, Mario. This was a lovely conversation. Maybe lovely is not the right word, but definitely an inspiring and very rich conversation. I feel we've only touched the surface. There's so many more things to talk about, to think about, to sort of dive deep into. Patricia, you just mentioned environmental justice issues, specifically in India, things really happening on a daily basis on a very large scale, agrarian resistance movements, literally all over the planet. I think what perhaps our discussion on water also has shown us is that water is really the medium of interconnectedness. And once you start thinking about the way it connects to different life forms, to different forms of existences, to different sort of geographical connections that are established, you would just realize that water is not just a tool of narration that allows us to sort of reconnect things that seem to be very much apart, but that actually disconnectedness is physically, materially, historically there, because that is, literally the way water as a medium functions, but also how, let's say, ecological realities sort of build their networks through human lives, politics, and histories of humans and non-humans alike. So thank you so much. We will continue this conversation hopefully soon on another and different platform. Thank you and good evening.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Thank you. Ciao, ciao.